Is Cadet 45 from 540 around? Because you are the top speaker of the House today. Come on down. We have one more job to do, Madam Speaker. May I see the cadets from 2 Vandenbosch Alpha? Alpha 2 Vandenbosch. You haven't won anything yet, but we're going to test your mettle. I'd also like to see the cadets from 756 Victor. Come on down.
Have in my hand a coin. The regular coin, the balloon. Yes. All right, it's going to have the head side, the queen, and the tail side. And, all right, looking at you, I am going to call it in the air. Okay? You're calling for choice, government, or opposition.
Tails. We would like to be opposition.
Opposition, government.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I now welcome you all to this annual Air Cadet debate competition. I'm Corporal Adiga of 540 Squadron, and I will be the Speaker of the House for this debate. The timekeeper for this debate is Warrant Officer Bouchard from 756 Squadron. The resolution to be debated today is, be it resolved that Canada should develop a Space Force as a part of our national defense strategy. To my right, debating as the Honourable Government from 2 Squadron is Gordon as the representing Prime Minister, and Sergeant Ryan from Squadron 2 representing the Minister of the Crown. And to my left, debating as the loyal opposition from 756 Squadron is Woe Snell as the Leader of the Opposition, and Woe Short as the member of the opposition. I would like to remind everyone to keep their electronic devices turned off until the conclusion of this debate. Each debater has 5 minutes to speak, and the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition both have 2 minutes extra for rebuttals. Heckling will be permitted only by competing debaters, but squirreling is not permitted. But still, heckling shouldn't be overdone. I now declare this debate open and call upon the Prime Minister to define the resolution and give the government's first case during their 5-minute address.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, we are debating the resolution, be it resolved, Canada should develop a space force as part of our national defense strategy. As the government, we have the honor and extreme privilege of defining today's resolution. We would like to define Canada as the nation in which we are currently situated. We would like to define develop as create and utilize technology for. We would like to define Space Force as a military branch that operates in space, and national defense system as the strategies a nation uses for its own defense. Madam Speaker, in order to have a successful, powerful, and strong nation, it is vital that a nation has a strong and effective defense strategy, keeping the people within it safe and secure. A nation's government must be making the most intelligent and effective decisions in order to keep the nation safe. For these reasons, Madam Speaker, the government as a whole are firm believers that this resolution must stand. But now, to enlighten you and the rest of the House as to why we believe that Canada should develop a Space Force as a part of our national defense strategy. One of the biggest benefits of implementing a Space Force as a branch of the Canadian military, Madam Speaker, would be the creation of many jobs and careers in the aerospace field. Every small aspect of building up this Space Force will result in countless jobs being created. There will be people educating the members of this Space Force. There will be people acting on this Space Force. And there will be people making sure this Space Force is the best it can possibly be for the defense of Canada. Madam Speaker, people are going to be able to have more and more opportunities to pursue their love for aerospace and these things. Madam Speaker, these people will be allowed to fulfill their passion for the defense of their nation. And Madam Speaker, this is a good thing. Canada should be doing this, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, along with this, the implementation of a Space Force would allow Canada to have a great advantage in space exploration. Developing a space force would, of course, Madam Speaker, have to use a lot of space research. A lot of space research is very good, Madam Speaker, because as far as we don't know a lot about what is out there, Madam Speaker. And it is very important that we, the people living in this almost infinite galaxy, to know what is out there. Madam Speaker, recently there has been numerous discoveries about a black hole that has been photographed for the first time in history. Madam Speaker, that is amazing. That is outstanding. Something that years ago, this could not be thought to be imaginable. But now, with the technology that we had, we were able to photograph it. But now, Madam Speaker, we can take steps for the future for Canada to discover even more things about outer space and developing this Space Force. Madam Speaker, just imagine the technological developments and benefits from this. With these technological developments and advancements, other countries would be allies with Canada as a nation, wanting to use these defense strategies along with us. Madam Speaker, there is nothing but benefits that comes with Canada implementing their Space Force. The future, Madam Speaker, it is inevitable that at some point, the planet Earth will no longer be habitable. In the conditions that our current nation as a whole is in, with global warming and pollution, eventually, we might need to have another planet to go to. With this advanced space exploration that Canada would be discovering, as well as implementing their Space Force, they'll be discovering new things and new technology that not only Canada, but the entire world can benefit from, Madam Speaker. The entire world will be benefiting from Canada's research towards the Space Force, Madam Speaker. And this is incredible. Madam Speaker, now to counter some points that might be brought up. One might argue that creating a Space Force would be a waste of technology, a waste of resources, since there is no immediate threat that is against Canada as a nation coming from a possible Space Force being necessary. But Madam Speaker, just because there is no immediate threat, that does not mean that Canada as a nation cannot take the necessary precautions to protect itself for the future. Madam Speaker, to ensure the proper safety of a strong nation, as mentioned before, the government must be taking the appropriate precautions for their nation to be safe. Therefore, Canada should be thinking advance and taking steps to advance themselves so they can be the proper defense that the nation should be, to keep our citizens safe and to keep everybody in this country alive and well. Just because there is no immediate threat to our country, that does not mean that we cannot be bettering ourselves and readying ourselves for the future that might come, Madam Speaker. For these reasons, that is why the government firmly believes that this resolution must stand.
Very well said, Prime Minister. Thank you. I would now like to call upon the first speaker from the opposition. And I would like to remind you that if you wish to introduce a counterplan, it must be done so during your 5-minute address right now.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government's plan, while optimistic, is simply not realistic. We do not live in a galaxy far, far away, and as such are limited by the real-world constraints of fiscal sanity. According to CanadianBusiness.com, the federal budget deficit for this year was $19.8 billion. We need to take a long, hard look at where our money is being spent and where we should focus it. And to do this, I'd like to check in on a few of the other branches of our military, ones that actually provide value to our country in the current moment. The Air Force. The Air Force is currently flying 40-year-old fighter jets that are older in most cases than the pilots flying them, and are currently basically falling apart, and we're buying 30-year-old ones to replace them. They're losing pilots because the pilots can be paid more in the civilian world, and they're being overstressed by duties due to a lack of pilots. The Navy is facing a major sailor shortage. Their boats are crashing into each other and setting on fire. We don't have any replenishment vessels.
Source.
And replacing them, that's from Global News. And according to our current defense
Madam
minister...
Speaker, I'd like to rise on a point of order.
Yes?
The opposition directly addressed my heckle and not you as the Speaker of the House.
Point not well taken. It wasn't really a heckle. You just your source, and they were addressing the source by giving where they got the information from. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And according to our own defense minister, Canada's naval capabilities are at a 40-year low. And again, the Army is again facing shortages across almost all of its positions and is lacking key funding for training. So I ask, where is the government going to get the money to both fix these problems with our actual military and also create a magical new space force out of thin air, a whole new branch of the military? Where are they going to get the money to fix our currently crumbling Canadian forces when they're trying to spend all our new money chasing something that doesn't even currently exist in any country in the world? Let's focus on a few of the points that the Space Force would stress. The acquisition process. Trying to acquire brand new military technology for space is simply unfeasible. We can barely decide which helicopters we want to buy, let alone what we're doing in space. It would further stretch the manpower of the forces thin. Again, we're facing manpower shortages across pretty much the whole thing.
Or creating more jobs.
Okay. Again, the government's tried to throw in a bit of Keynesian economics, Madam Speaker, here by saying that by magically spending money, we're going to create more jobs. Where does that money come from? Hardworking Canadian citizens who would otherwise spend the money on other things, which would provide other businesses. Money that's being shuffled around is not creating jobs, it's just moving jobs from one place to another. Anyway, space technology is extremely expensive. Canada doesn't really have the money to do this. The Canadarm2 costs $1.4 billion over 20 years, according to the CBC. And not only that, Canada doesn't have the actual infrastructure to create any of these magical space industries the government's talking about. The last rocket launch in Canada was in 1998 by a private company, and our only government rocket range, the Churchill Rocket Research Range, was essentially deserted in 1985. We have practically zero aerospace industry, and the government's going to magically spend a large quantity of money to build this up. Now, the government also said, we're going to research and develop new technology. They didn't explicitly state for what purpose. Are we defending satellites? Are we building a Death Star? What exactly are we going to be doing in space? Exploration sounds really great, but why does that have to be done by a space force in the military? Now, not only this, Madam Speaker, what the government is suggesting is actually illegal under a 1960s United Nations Outer Space Treaty,
It's
which
2017. 19.
Okay, United Nations treaties, last time I checked, don't just become invalid because it's been a long time since they were signed. It explicitly states you are not allowed to militarize space. Outer space is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty. It says it should be free for exploration, and I don't see how militarizing space provides any real benefit towards that regard. Additionally, Madam Speaker, they brought up the point about how other countries will be wanting to ally with us because of this magical space force. I say the opposite. We're currently not really in a good situation geopolitically, with tensions high with China, and China trying to develop their own, trying to go into space on their own, and us trying to develop this a space force would only further provoke countries like China to kind of maybe reignite an arms race in space and lead to perhaps another Cold War, Madam Speaker. To summarize my points, this plan is not in the realm of reality. We are not in the world of Star Trek. We don't have the money to build this. The government just magically thinks the space industry is going to appear out of nowhere if they throw enough money at it. We don't have the staffing in the military to do this. It's illegal under United Nations treaty. And the money that the resources and to be allocated to this project would be much better spent fixing the other parts of our Canadian armed forces. While it is important to protect Canadians from all threats, the threat from space has so far yet to be demonstrated, and it's great to be protected in space, but at the same time, our planes are basically paper airplanes, our boats are crashing into each other and setting on fire. So realistically, if someone wants to attack Canada, all they have to do is walk in. Space isn't going to matter at all. And that is why we need to take a long, hard look at where our money is being spent, take a long, hard look at whether the legality of this thing even exists, and take a long, hard look at whether this resolution is what we need for our Canadian forces. And we as the opposition say that it is not what we need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very well said, thank you. I would now like to call upon the second speaker from the government for their 5-minute remark.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're here today to debate, be it resolved, that Canada should develop a space force as part of our national defense system.
Yeah, no, we got that.
Madam Speaker, I would like to start off by saying, with the evolution of humans and technology, space has become a vital part of everyone's everyday life. Madam Speaker, I'd first like to start by saying that our economy will be benefited immensely from the Space Force. By creating the Space Force, we allow for citizens around Canada to actually pursue a meaningful career. Nowadays, a lot of different students will leave high school not knowing what to do. However, this Space Force gives them the option to be a part of something big, to be the first to get to space. Madam Speaker, listen to this. The opposition did state that it is expensive to create a Space Force. While this is true in fact, why are we replacing old planes and naval ships with still old models, while we could be moving into the future with space technology?
Perhaps X-Wings?
Think about it, Madam Speaker. It protects from the air. You're able to provide reconnaissance from satellites. You're able to even perhaps send missiles from space. And even you have the ability to even perhaps have a war in space while not damaging civilian lives. Civilian lives that do matter in fact. Madam Speaker, if we are able to phase out these old branches of the military, we're able to create this new prosperous way of life and way of living. Madam Speaker, I would like to continue on by saying that the safety that is provided from the Space Force is amazing. Madam Speaker, as I mentioned before, you're able to actually provide reconnaissance from satellites. You're able to look at any part of the world at any given time because of these satellites. Why are we not using this technology to the best of our ability? I think that it is ludicrous, Madam Speaker, that we are not considering building a Space Force for our future generations. It is clear. The United Nations stated that if we do not change our ways within 12 years, our planet will become inhabitable
They also said we
and
couldn't build a Space
unsustainable
Force.
for future generations. Why are we risking the lives of future generations by not venturing into space? We know that this planet will not be able to sustain all human life on one day. However, with the development of a Space Force, we as the Canadian public have the opportunity to inspire others, to look into other technologies. And in reality, we have the ability to not only make this world a better place, but the universe a better place. Madam Speaker, I would also like to continue on with the point that there are other countries and even nations considering building a Space Force. We need to take this into serious effect. If we, as Canada, do not create a Space Force soon, we know that there will be other countries that will be creating Space Forces, such as China, or the United States, or perhaps even Russia. Madam Speaker, why are we not protecting ourselves from these countries that we know are already threats on Earth? I would like to further on by saying, Madam Speaker, China, although we already have a hostile relationship with them, once they go up into space, why should we not go up into space either? Or perhaps, if we don't take the first step, they will. We need to be on top of our game, and we need to be a country that trailblazes, not one that follows behind. Madam Speaker, the future is extremely unclear, and we're not able to predict all events that are to come. However, we need to ensure that we will remain safe as Canadian citizens as further threats will be coming from space. Madam Speaker, also, as a Space Force, we have the ability not only to protect our own country, yet the entire world. Being in space, we have the ability to defend against other objects that are throughout space, such as asteroids or other big celestial bodies that could potentially harm life on Earth. When we are not only benefiting the Canadian people, but also people of other countries, we need to realize that this is just even bigger than Canada. It's not just Canada, but we are benefiting the world. Finally, Madam Speaker, I would like to go and rebut the fact that the opposition said that this is an illegal force, considering the Treaty of 1967. However, the treaty stated that only the moon cannot have military bases on it, and also nuclear weapons are not allowed in space, as well as weapons of mega destruction. So, Madam Speaker, we need to realize that that was a long time ago, and society is a lot different today, and therefore this resolution must stand.
That was an excellent speech. Thank you. I would now like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition to give the final remark from the opposition. And I would like to remind you that the last 2 minutes of your speech must include your rebuttal towards the government during your 7-minute remark.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Rather than end it off for the last 2 minutes, I'd rather first like to point out the fact that the government seems to have two different lines of reasoning. On the one hand, they're saying we need a Space Force. Why do we need a Space Force? Well, it's for the benefit of mankind. You know, we're in the 12 short years that the government says we have left. We're going to find a completely new planet. We're going to, make this hospitable, and we're all going to do this through Space Force. It'll be for the benefit of mankind. Few things to touch on that. First of all, why must it be a Space Force? Why does it have to be military? A fourth branch of the military in order to do this. We already have the Canadian Space Agency. The government themselves said they wanted a Space Force, another branch of the military, and they're talking about the benefit of this will be that we'll be able to, as globally, I guess, we'll be able to go and go where no man has ventured before. Well, that's, as my colleague said, that's awfully optimistic of them, but also not very realistic. And again, why must it be a Space Force? Now, to touch on the other part of the reasoning from the government, they said that we need this Space Force in order to protect Canadians. Now, this is directly contradictory to what they were talking about before. One hand, they're saying this will create global cooperation, everyone's going to leave the Earth, we're going off to a different planet. And then on the other hand, they're talking about using the Space Force for military needs. Again, how can we reconcile these two very different points that by having a Space Force to counteract other countries will therefore be closer together? That's frankly simply not realistic. It is not at all logical. The government also talked a lot about how a Space Force would benefit us, talking about different things that we could do. And again, I stress, many of these things do not have to be a military operation. They don't have to be a fourth branch of the military. We already have things like the Canadian Space Agency. We already have NASA, which is tracking any asteroids or celestial bodies which could impact the Earth. Canada does not need to create their own military branch in order to do this. And if the government is so worried about these threats, which they themselves say are not immediate, just one day in the future could potentially harm Canada, thankfully, another point that the government seems to not be able to reconcile is they say no one can predict the future, and at the same time they are predicting the future. If there are any threats from government, from hostile governments, we thankfully have something called the NORAD Space Command. We work with the United States, a much larger military, a country which actually has the infrastructure for an aerospace industry to exist. Canada simply does not. It's completely silly that we're just going to ignore the fact that the little threats that we do see from space, we're going to ignore the fact that NORAD can deal with them. Instead, move on to having a completely brand new Canadian branch. Now, as my colleague had said before, Canada is simply not a country with the infrastructure in order to support an aerospace industry, let alone a fourth branch of the military dedicated solely to space. Where is the funding coming from? They're talking about how creating the Space Force will in fact create jobs. And as we said before, this is Keynesian economics. This has been proven false. You cannot tax people. You cannot take from businesses. Shovel money from one area of the economy in another, and then somehow that will benefit everyone and create jobs. That, in the United States, was coined by Dwight D. Eisenhower as the military-industrial complex. It's the idea that you're going to use the military. In this case, we're going to invent a fourth branch in order to create profits. We're going to take money from the taxpayers, hardworking people. We're going to take from every single industry in Canada and funnel that all into this one industry, which, frankly, Madam Speaker, is immoral. We should not. The idea of the Canadian Armed Forces is not to generate profits. It's not to talk about creating jobs. Under no area under the mandate of the Canadian Armed Forces does it talk about the economy. Does it talk about economic incentives? The Canadian Armed Forces are there to protect Canadian citizens. It is not there to be a pet project so that people can go off and pursue their passion because they like aerospace. Let us spend all this money. Let's spend another $1.4 billion on an arm that can go into space. Because why? Because people want to be able to pursue their passion. Look, I'm all fine with people trying to pursue their passion, but I'm not fine with is creating a fourth branch of the military, taking money from hard-working Canadians in order to fund this, especially when the armed forces, the ones that are real, the ones that actually protect Canadians, are in such state that they are. In addressing our point about the fact that the Air Force doesn't have adequate planes, did the government say, oh, we'll buy F-35s? No, they're talking about creating new planes. I don't even know what they're talking about. X-Wings. They're talking about the technology that will come from here. Madam Speaker, before we can start going off in space, creating X-Wings and Death Stars and TIE Fighters, I think it's more important that we start working on our current...
point of privilege.
Yes?
The government never stated that we would be creating Death Stars.
We'll take it. Next time, if you would quote something the government stated, please say before if you're paraphrasing or making a joke beforehand. Thank you. Continue.
I apologize, Madam Speaker. I thought the people in this room were able to understand that it was satire, but I was gravely mistaken, so I apologize. As I said, before we can start working on the space, we need to look first at our current armed forces. We need to, before we can look to the space, even talk about a fourth branch, no matter the realm. We need to make sure that our current armed forces are able to protect Canadians. And in its current state, frankly, we are not able to. From what I can gather from the government, they seem to believe this too, because they talk about how the Space Force will help protect Canadians. Madam Speaker, we live in reality. We must be grounded in reality. The Canadian government only has so much money. We only have so many human resources. We only have so many resources that we can dedicate towards specific projects. Creating a Space Force and exploring will be very, very costly, especially if we do it through the government's plan, where we create a completely brand new fourth branch of the military in a country which has a lackluster aerospace industry to begin with. We can take money from the Canadian economy, cost hundreds and thousands of jobs in other places. We may not see these things specifically, but the fact is that money will come out of Canadian taxpayers' pockets. We can put this into the Space Force, but the fact is this will not benefit Canadians. This will not keep Canadian citizens safe. This is simply a ludicrous idea. This is a ludicrous idea to take money from hardworking taxpayers and to funnel into a military branch which will do nothing for Canadians, especially when our armed forces need the money now. Madam Speaker, this resolution, as the government has defined, is not about a Space Force. It is about what is right and wrong. And Madam Speaker, the government is on the wrong side. The opposition is proud to say that we do not support this resolution and instead support what we can all agree is common sense. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very nicely said. Thank you. I would now like to call upon the Prime Minister for her last 2-minute rebuttal period. And I would like to remind all debaters that heckling will not be permitted during this.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin rebutting the points that the opposition has stated, I would like to state that all quotations I have are paraphrases and not direct word-for-word quotes. Now, the first point I would like to rebut is that the opposition was constantly bringing up the sense of money and where the money for this Space Force would be coming from. They constantly brought up the term that it would be coming from hard-working Canadians, presumably what they're talking about being tax dollars of the citizens. But, Madam Speaker, think about it. These people are getting a tiny fraction of their tax dollars increased so that this can go towards their overall defense and safety. Madam Speaker, it might seem like a hassle for them for their money getting increased that being taken from them. But Madam Speaker, it is for their safety and their well-being. They might not know it because a lot of citizens might not have the proper education of where this money is going to, and they might just think, oh well, it's going up, and be upset. But Madam Speaker, this is for their well-being. Whether or not they like it, this is for the defense of the nation and the people within it. The next point I would like to rebut, Madam Speaker, is that the opposition stated that there are hostile relationships between Canada and some other countries. Therefore, the Space Force will not be able to, the technology developed from the Space Force will not be able to be shared with them. But Madam Speaker, it is never too late to end bad relationships and form new ones. This technology between other countries will be able to help the world as a whole step forward into the future of space exploration. Because, Madam Speaker, like my colleague said, there are only 12 years, if we don't change anything, where this planet will become inhabitable, Madam Speaker. We need to start acting now to take steps towards the future where people will be able to live safely. Whether or not this decision seems rash at first, but Madam Speaker, this is what has to be done for the people of this country. We cannot only be thinking of now, Madam Speaker, but we have to be thinking of tomorrow, the future of Canada and the future of the people living within it. And that is why the government firmly believes this resolution must stand. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very well said. Thank you. I would now like to address all the judges in the room. If you could please raise your hand. Okay. And I would like to ask if, time permitting, they give their critiques, and I believe the winner will be announced.
The team that placed third in this year's debating competition is Team November from 3645. one, you know the other, right? So, it is my privilege to tell you at this time that by a score of 915 to 896, the winning team is Team Victor.
Yes!
In second place, Team Alpha.